I'm Captain Tori Myers, and I was 32 the morning my mom begged me to hide who I was. She stood in my childhood doorway holding a blue dress on a hanger, and she asked me not to wear my uniform to my brother's wedding. "The military is embarrassing," she said. "Just this once. Blend in." I had flown 1,100 miles for that wedding. I had kept my mouth shut for years, but standing there in that hallway, I understood something I'd been avoiding for a very long time. She had no idea who would be sitting in that ballroom. And honestly, neither did I. What happened when I finally walked through those doors is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where families learn that the people they overlooked were the strongest ones in the room. If quiet dignity is your kind of justice, you're home. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe, because this one is going to stay with you. Let me back up, because you need to know who I was before that doorway. My apartment near base fits in a duffel bag. I like it that way. I keep my boots by the door and my coffee strong, and most nights I'm asleep by 9. The Marines I serve with know me better than my own family ever tried to. We've eaten out of the same cans. We've stood the same watches. When one of us has a bad night, the others stay up. That's the closest thing to a family I've ever fully trusted. My blood family is a different country, with a language I never quite learned. I'm the older sibling, the one who left at 18 and didn't come back the way they wanted. I send birthday cards. I show up for funerals. I carry the heavy bags so nobody has to ask. That's been my whole role in the Myers family for as long as I can remember. Keep the peace. Take the weight. Don't make it weird. So when my mother called and asked me to fly home for Wes's wedding, I said yes before she finished the sentence. I always say yes. I booked the flight. I pressed my uniform out of habit. And I told myself this trip would be simple. A toast. A dance. A flight home. I am very good at planning operations. I am terrible at predicting my own family. Here's the part I still don't understand about myself even now. I can stand calm under fire. I can give an order with people's lives in my hands. But put my mother in front of me with a disappointed face, and I shrink to half my size. That weekend, I found out exactly how much that habit had cost me. The thing about being overlooked is that it happens slowly. There's no single moment. There are 1,000 small ones. When I enlisted, my mother told the neighbors I was taking some time to figure things out. When I was commissioned, she didn't come to the ceremony. She had a charity luncheon she couldn't move. When I got promoted, she changed the subject to my cousin's new kitchen. Over the years, I learned to stop bringing it up. I'd mention a deployment and watch her smile go tight and polite. I'd start to say something about my work, and she'd find a reason to refill the iced tea. Once, at a backyard party, a neighbor asked what I did, and before I could answer, my mother said it for me. "Oh, Tori's in the service. It's a phase. She'll land somewhere sensible." "The military is embarrassing," she'd say to my father in the kitchen, not knowing the vents carried sound straight up to my old room. I heard that line through the floor when I was 24. I heard it again at 28. By 30, I'd stopped flinching. I just got quieter. I stopped explaining a long time ago. You can't argue someone into respecting you. I'd figured that out the hard way. So I became the daughter who sent money on Mother's Day and never talked about her job, and everyone in that family seemed perfectly comfortable with the arrangement. Nobody ever asked what I actually did out there. Not once. Not my mother, not my father, not my brother. They had a version of me in their heads, and it was easier for everyone if I matched it. The strange thing is, I almost did. Right up until I couldn't anymore. My brother Wes was always the bright one. Not smarter, just easier to be proud of. He went to a good school, got a finance job downtown, and wore the kind of watch that says something about your future. My mother lit up around him the way she never did around me. When he called to say he was engaged, she cried for an hour. The good kind of crying. The girl's name was Sloane Whitfield, and the way my mother said the name, you'd think it was a title. The Whitfields were old money. Real old money. The quiet kind, with a family name on a building somewhere, and a house that had been in the family for 3 generations. To my mother, this engagement wasn't just Wes getting married. It was the family arriving somewhere it had been climbing toward her whole life. "We're finally going to be the kind of family people respect," she told me on the phone, and I noticed she said, "finally," like the rest of us had been holding her back. So the wedding became a campaign. The right caterer, the right flowers, the right everyone. I got assigned a small supporting role. Show up. Smile. Don't draw attention. I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was Sloane herself. The first time we spoke on the phone, she asked me about my actual life. Not the polite version. The real one. She asked good questions and listened to the answers, and at the end, she said something that surprised me. "I'm so glad Wes has a sister like you," she said. I didn't know what to do with that. Nobody in my own family had said anything close to it in years. I should have wondered, right then, what kind of family raised a girl who'd say that. To be fair to my mother, and I am trying to be fair, you have to understand where she came from. Her father, my grandfather, came home from Vietnam a different man than the one who left. He drank. He couldn't hold a job. The family moved every year or two, chasing cheaper rent. And my mother spent her childhood being the new girl in clothes that didn't fit. She told me once, in a rare, soft moment, about a teacher who held up her shoes in front of the class. She was 11. She never forgot it. To her, the uniform my grandfather wore wasn't honor. It was the start of everything that went wrong. It meant noise at night and empty cupboards and a father who scared her. So she spent her entire adult life climbing away from it. The right neighborhood. The right friends, the country club membership she could barely afford. And then her own daughter put on a uniform and walked straight back into the thing she'd run from. That's the part nobody in those revenge stories ever explains. My mother didn't hate me. She was terrified of what I represented. Every ribbon on my chest looked to her like a slide back down into the poverty and shame she'd clawed out of. I understood that. I really did. Understanding it didn't make it hurt less, because here's the thing about being someone's fear instead of their daughter. You spend your whole life being managed, hidden, softened, kept out of the good light. And no matter how calm you are about it, a part of you keeps waiting to be claimed. I had been waiting a long time. I just didn't know how long until that weekend forced me to count. The ask came 2 days before the wedding. I was in my old bedroom, unzipping my garment bag, when my mother knocked once and let herself in. She had a dress over her arm, a long, soft, expensive blue. She laid it on the bed like an offering. "I thought you could wear this," she said. "It's your size." I looked at it and then at her. She wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "The Whitfields are very refined," she went on, talking faster now. "The whole evening is black tie. A uniform would be, well, a lot. People will stare. It's not that kind of crowd." I told her I'd planned to wear my dress blues, that it's perfectly appropriate, that officers wear them to weddings all the time. She shook her head before I finished. "Just wear the blue dress," she said. "For once, blend in." There it was. The line landed soft, almost kind, and that's what made it cut. She wasn't yelling. She was asking me, gently, to disappear. I stood there holding the hanger of my uniform in one hand and the hanger of her dress in the other, like a scale. And I felt the old reflex kick in, the one that says, keep the peace, take the weight, don't make it weird. I almost said yes. God help me, I almost said it. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled, relieved, and squeezed my arm, and said she knew I'd understand. Then she left the dress on my bed and went downstairs to call the florist. I sat down next to that blue dress for a long time. I'd carried heavier things than a dress, but somehow that one felt like it might break me. Here's a confession. I'm not the kind of person who fights back loudly. That's not modesty. It's a real flaw, and it's cost me. The skill that keeps people alive in a firefight is the same one that lets you stand still while your own family erases you. You learn to absorb. You learn to wait. You learn that your discomfort is cheaper than everyone else's. So you eat it. My counselor on base once called it over-responsibility, like it was a thing you could put down. I never could. That night, I sat on the floor of my old room and reached into the inside pocket of my uniform jacket, where I keep one thing always: a challenge coin. Plain, heavy, the edges worn smooth from my thumb. A friend gave it to me, a long time ago, and I've carried it every single day since. I turned it over in my palm the way I always do when I need to remember who I actually am. I'm not going to tell you the whole story of that coin yet. I can't. Not in one breath. But I'll tell you this. Whatever my mother thought the uniform meant, it didn't mean a phase. It didn't mean a costume. It meant a morning I will never get to forget, and people I will never get to see again. I sat there with the coin in one hand and the blue dress beside me, and I thought, you have stood in worse rooms than a ballroom. You have. The trouble was, I'd never once stood up to her. I'd faced down things that could kill me. I had never faced down a disappointed mother. I told myself I'd decide in the morning. I didn't sleep much. The rehearsal gathering was at the Whitfield house, and the Whitfield house was something. Not flashy. Just old and sure of itself, the way real money is. There were portraits on the walls and a library with a ladder and a back lawn that ran down to water. My mother moved through it like she'd been rehearsing for this her whole life, laughing a little too brightly, touching people's arms. She introduced Wes to everyone. She introduced me to almost no one. When someone did ask about me, she had her line ready. "Oh, Tori's between things right now," she'd say, and steer them toward the cheese board. I let it happen. I always let it happen. I found a quiet corner with a glass of water and watched my family perform. But two things caught my eye that night, and I didn't think much of either one at the time. The first was a photograph on a side table, an old black and white of a young man in a uniform I recognized from history, a Marine, jaw set, eyes steady. The second was an older gentleman across the room, silver-haired, straight-backed, who looked at me a beat too long. He didn't say anything. He just held my gaze, gave the smallest nod, and turned away. I figured he was being polite. Something about that house felt familiar to me, and I couldn't say why. I chalked it up to nerves and old wood and the smell of furniture polish. I should have paid attention. I was so busy making myself small that I missed the most important thing in the room. The Whitfields were not who my mother thought they were, and by the time I figured that out, it would already be too late to take it back. Back in my old room that night, I unzipped the garment bag all the way and looked at the dress blues hanging there in the lamplight. The dark coat, the standing collar, the eagle, globe, and anchor catching the light on each button. I don't talk about it much, but the first time I was allowed to wear that uniform, my hands shook. Not from fear, from the weight of what it asked of you. There are rules for everything on it. Nothing extra. No flourishes. Every ribbon has to be earned, and earned in a specific way, and you wear them in a specific order, and there is no faking any of it. That's what I love about it, honestly. It can't lie. It tells the exact truth about a person whether they want it told or not. I ran my thumb along the rows on the chest and stopped where I always stop. The blue dress was still folded on the chair where my mother had left it. Soft, pretty, anonymous. The kind of thing you wear when you want to be remembered as nice and nothing else. I held the two of them up, one in each hand, the way I had 2 nights before. And I noticed something. When I imagined walking in wearing the dress, I felt relief. When I imagined walking in wearing the blues, I felt afraid. And for the first time in years, the fear interested me more than the relief. Fear usually means you're close to something that matters. I zipped the garment bag back up without deciding, and I set it by the door. I told myself I still had time. What I didn't have time for was the conversation that came the next morning, before I'd even had coffee. Wes found me in the kitchen at 7. He had 2 mugs, and the careful face of a man about to ask for something. He set the coffee down and leaned against the counter and tried to sound casual. "So, the uniform thing," he said. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, it's just, the Whitfields are kind of formal and I don't want it to be a whole thing, you know? It's my one day. I want it to go smooth. Just be normal for one day." For me. There it was again, dressed up in different clothes. Be normal. As if I'd been abnormal all along. I looked at my little brother, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the man who'd never once asked what I did overseas, and I saw it clearly. He wasn't cruel. He was scared. Scared his refined new in-laws would see his strange older sister, the one with the short hair and the careful posture, and the stories he didn't understand. And underneath that, something he'd never admit. He was scared that next to me, in that uniform, he might come out smaller. He'd spent his whole life as the easy one to be proud of, and on some level he knew it had never been tested. I didn't say any of that. I just asked him a question. Wes, do you even know what I did over there? He blinked. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Sure, he said finally. You know, marine stuff. That was it. That was the whole answer. My own brother, on his wedding day, and the sum total of his curiosity about my life was marine stuff. I told him I'd be there, and I'd behave, and I walked out before he could see my face. The family lunch that day was a chorus. Aunts, an uncle, 2 cousins, all gathered around my mother's table, and the topic, eventually, was me. It started gently. So Tori, are you seeing anyone? When I said no, my Aunt Carol made a soft, sad sound, like I'd reported a death. You know, she said, you're not getting younger, and that life can't go on forever. That life. My uncle chimed in that he'd read the military was downsizing. Wasn't I worried? A cousin asked if I'd ever thought about a real career once I got out. Each one landed like a small stone, and I sat there and let them stack up, smiling, passing the rolls. My mother watched it happen with quiet satisfaction. This was her family, speaking her language, confirming her version of me. I had spent so many years being the one who absorbs that I didn't even notice I'd gone silent. I just got smaller and smaller at that table until I was barely there. But there was one person who didn't join in. My Aunt Diane, my mother's younger sister, sat at the far end and didn't say a word. She kept looking at me, then down at her plate, then at my mother, and her mouth went thin and unhappy. At one point she started to say something, then stopped herself and reached for her water instead. I noticed it the way you notice a door left open in a house you thought was empty. I didn't know what it meant yet, but Aunt Diane knew something the rest of the table didn't, and it was eating at her. 2 hours later, she would do the thing that changed the whole weekend, and she would do it almost by accident. After lunch, I went upstairs and did something I'm not proud of. I tried on the blue dress. I told myself I was just checking the fit. That's a lie. I was trying to see if I could disappear, and whether disappearing might be easier than the alternative. The dress fit perfectly, of course. My mother had a good eye. I stood in front of the old mirror in my childhood room and looked at the woman in the soft blue fabric, and she was lovely, and she was a stranger. She had no edges. She had no story. She was exactly what everyone downstairs wanted me to be, which is to say, she was nobody in particular. The woman in the mirror was someone I'd been pretending to be for years, and seeing her so clearly made my chest ache. I thought, I could do this. I could wear this dress, get through the toast, get on the plane, and keep the peace the way I always have. Nobody would be hurt. Everyone would be comfortable. And I would go home and put the coin back in the uniform jacket and tell myself it didn't matter what they saw, because I knew the truth. Except I'd been telling myself that for 10 years, and it had quietly become a way to never have to be brave in front of the only people who could actually wound me. I stood there in that beautiful, empty dress, and I felt the decision sitting somewhere just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. Dress or blues? Disappear or be seen? I still hadn't decided when my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text from Aunt Diane. No words. Just a screenshot. I picked it up, and the whole floor tilted. Before I tell you what was in that screenshot, I have to tell you about the coin, because the two things hit me in the same hour and I can't separate them anymore. The coin was Danny's. Lance Corporal Danny Brennan, 19 years old, from a town in Ohio with one stoplight. Danny was the kid who kept candy in his cargo pocket and gave it away. He used to call me ma'am in this exaggerated, grinning way that should have been annoying, and somehow wasn't. The week before everything went wrong, he pressed this coin into my hand after a long day and said, "For luck, ma'am, you carry it." I laughed and tried to give it back. He wouldn't take it. So I kept it. I still have it. He doesn't. That's the part of the story I don't say out loud, even now, 6 years later. There was a road, and a morning, and a vehicle that should have made it through, and didn't. 3 of my Marines came home because of choices made in about 90 seconds. Danny was not one of the 3. I have gone over those 90 seconds more times than I can count, and I have made my peace with most of it. The way you make peace with a thing that will never be finished. The coin is how I carry him. Every day in my pocket, against my heart, where the metal would later sit. So when my mother said the military was embarrassing, she wasn't talking about a job. She was, without knowing it, talking about Danny. About the morning. About the worst and most important day of my life. I held the coin tight in my fist. Then I looked back down at my phone. And I read the screenshot. And everything changed. The screenshot was from a group text. It was titled Wedding Logistics. And it had everyone in it. My mother, my father, Wes, the aunts, the cousins, everyone except me. Aunt Diane had sent it to me alone, with no message, the way you hand someone the truth and step back. I read it once and didn't believe it. Then I read it again. My mother had written, that morning, a series of messages I can still recite from memory. Please make sure no one encourages Tori to wear the uniform. The Whitfields are extremely refined and it would be humiliating. Seat her at table 9, near the back, away from the head table. And then the line, typed out, in a family group chat, for everyone but me to see. The military is embarrassing and I won't have her turning Wes's wedding into a parade. There were little thumbs-up reactions under it. A cousin had replied, LOL agreed. Wes had replied with a single word. Fine. My father had not replied at all. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed in a borrowed blue dress and read it a third time. The strange thing is, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I went very, very still, the way I get when something serious is happening and panic would only cost lives. There's a kind of calm that isn't peace. It's the calm right before a decision. I set the phone down on the bedspread, screen up, my mother's words still glowing there. Table 9, near the back. A parade. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down very, very gently, like it might go off. And I sat there in the quiet and let myself understand, finally, exactly what my place in this family had always been. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't rage. People expect rage. Rage would have been easier. What I felt was clarity, cold and clean, like stepping outside into winter air. For 10 years, I'd told myself a story. The story was that my family didn't understand me, but that underneath it all, they loved me. And the hiding was just my mother's way, and someday they'd come around. That story died on that bedspread. They understood me fine. They'd decided. I picked the phone back up and read the chat one more time, slower, and that's when I saw it. The timestamps. My mother sent the message at 11:40. My father's phone, the chat showed, had read it at 11:42. He saw it. He read the words, "The military is embarrassing," 2 minutes after she typed them, on the morning of his son's wedding, about his daughter. And he said nothing. Not a single word. The silence was its own message, and I'd been receiving it my whole life without ever reading it correctly. My father wasn't the quiet, good man caught in the middle that I'd cast him as. He was a man who watched me get erased, year after year, and chose comfort over me every single time. That hurt worse than my mother's line somehow. Her cruelty at least cost her something, a fear she was running from. His cost him nothing. He just had to stay quiet, and he was so good at that. I stood up. I took off the blue dress. I hung it back on the chair, smoothed it flat, almost tenderly, like saying goodbye to a version of myself. I wasn't angry. I was done disappearing. The only question left was how. That afternoon, I went over to the venue early because I needed air and a task. The reception was being held in the ballroom of a historic club the Whitfields had used for generations. I walked the room while the staff set tables, just to ground myself, the way I'd walk a position before anything happened. And I started noticing things. There was a small brass plaque by the entrance I'd missed before, dedicating a scholarship fund in someone's memory. There was a display case in the hall with old photographs, and more than one of them showed men in uniform. Then Sloane found me, lovely and a little frazzled in her rehearsal clothes, and we walked a slow lap together. She pointed at one of the photographs without slowing down. "That's my grandfather," she said, warm and easy. "He served. He's the reason this whole family is the way it is." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like everyone knew. And then she got pulled away by a question about chairs. I stood in front of that photograph for a second. An old man, young in the picture, a uniform I knew in my bones. The reason this whole family is the way it is. Something turned over in the back of my mind, quiet and slow, but I was too full of my own decision to chase it. I filed it away. I keep doing that, in this story, don't I? Noticing the most important thing and walking right past it. In my defense, I had a lot on my mind. I had spent the afternoon deciding to stop hiding from my family. I had no idea that the family I was marrying my brother into had spent generations learning to honor exactly what mine was ashamed of. The night before the wedding, I made my choice. I laid the dress blues out on the bed, flat and square, and I went over every inch. I want you to understand this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't planning to ruin anyone's day. I wasn't going to give a speech or cause a scene or say a single word about that group chat. I was simply going to stop helping them hide me. There's a difference, and it matters. My mother had asked me to disappear for everyone's comfort. I'd done that for a decade. I was just, finally, going to show up as myself. I pinned the medals carefully, in their order, each one a date and a name. And when I came to one of them, my fingers slowed and then stopped, and I had to set it down and pick it back up twice before I got it pinned straight. My hands were not steady. They are steady under almost anything. They were not steady then. I sat with the uniform a long time. Now, let me say something to you directly, because I think some of you know exactly where I was sitting. I almost wore that blue dress. I almost made myself smaller again, because it was the path that hurt the fewest people, and I'm the kind of person who counts that.